in Western civilization. I wonder if there is any way that, or any way a strategy could be developed to, if not uncouple it, to neutralize it.
Yeah, this of course. These are tasks.
That's the task.
Your task.
Okay. In the history of the church, there are a number of major breakups or shakeups. One is the Great Schism at the beginning of the 11th century, but one that I'm particularly interested in is the Protestant Reformation.
He's dead?
The Protestant Reformation. During which time there were some very, very significant shifts in the way that, for instance, the way that the people, the church, would relate to authority. There was a change in the understanding of the status of priesthood and what that means. How do you see that event as fitting into the genealogy that you've kind of constructed, or had the ball already been rolling too fast that it was already out of control?
As we said at the seminar, if you remember, I think that we cannot understand Protestantism if we do not remember that Luther was a monk. An understanding monk. Not was a monk because it married one. So it's Protestantism is an extreme moment of the inner tension between monkhood and priesthood. And but as far as the liturgy is concerned, as you know, one of the first consequences of Protestantism is the diminution of liturgy. The liturgical element is almost erased. No, as you know, no, that's one of the main features of Protestantism, and this is interesting to understand why Protestantism coincides with the reduction of liturgy, of the liturgical moment. Yes, please.
With art, Picasso said all art is political, and I always felt that was an appropriate task, that that was a noble thing in some sense. But would you argue that art should remain without a sense of duty?
How can art have to do with duty? Do you think that art can have to do with duty? With politics, yes, perhaps, a lot.
With public action.
Huh?
So in terms of the relationship between art and liturgy, as you define as public action, so that if that's not an appropriate relationship, then art should have no duty. Is that correct? Am I understanding that?
I think that if you ask an artist what is the duty of an artist, it's a strange question. But it would never, when I see this proximity between artistic movements starting from the 20th century and liturgy, I think this was the phenomenon, the historical phenomenon I wanted to underscore. I don't think at all that art is always liturgical. What I wanted to underscore is this peculiar moment, which could be called the age of liturgy, in which everything takes a color of liturgy. But I don't think that the notion of office is appropriated for the artistic practices. Okay, one more lady, please.
I just want to say thank you. I'm curious about the whole question in a little bit more detail. What you think, if you think that the idea of movement can do without hierarchy, or do we just do away with movement for a more interesting idea in general?
If there is a link between the notion of movement and the notion of hierarchy.
I'm just wondering if you think we can have movement without hierarchy, or do we just do away with the idea of movement altogether? The idea of movements.
This problem of a possible archaeology, genealogy of the notion of movement, I think it's very interesting. I remember that this idea went to me. I was in a political meeting with Tony Negri and other leaders of the ex-Italian autonomies, and they always speak of the movement, the movement, the movement. The movement is alive, the movement is alive. And then I realized that nobody, included me, had no idea what this word could mean. And then I worked a little on the history of the notion, and the most embarrassing thing is that this concept is shared both by fascism, Nazism, and worker movements, etc. And this is very embarrassing, so we have to work on this movement and try to clarify, especially because the only serious work on the notion of movement is again made by Carl Schmitt, who in 1933 published a book, an essay called Staat, Bewegung, Volk, in which he tried to make the theory of Nazism. And he defined the Bewegung as the kind of a real political subjectivity. The real political subject is the Bewegung.
I think our question was...
But then it's very embarrassing that the only theory we have of the movement is made by Carl Schmitt.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but our question I think was, can there be a movement without a leader? Is movement is in the concept...
Without the office, yeah, without the...
No, the notion in itself, as it is a little mysterious, I don't think it implies necessarily a hierarchy and leader.
Right.
It should be understood.
Somebody I don't see. Yeah, please.
Grazie. Thank you so much. So I'm curious also about, earlier we heard ritual, and there's a question of performance, and the digital age. There's this question of a constant repeating, and that suggests to me in the digital age, we now have a profound problem of trust. That, like, I'm very fortunate to have a bizarre name in America. So if someone looks for me, it's easy to find me. And because it's a weird name, you can trust it. I wonder one thing that seems interesting about liturgy, although maybe separate from VQ, is this idea of repetition, behaving in a way repeatedly. Maybe this movement, that you can trust in, that I do something so that those later can trust that this is a good way to behave. And I would ask them to think, well, what was good about what I did, and do it in the future. Maybe I'm horribly out of line in talking this way, but do you have ideas about, or could you elaborate more about ritual and liturgy? In this way?
As far as iterability, repetition is concerned, this I told you, what strikes me in the Christian model of liturgy is this contradiction between an event which should be unique because it's Christ sacrifice once for all, and building on that something which is constitutively iterable, can be repeated indefinitely. This strikes me a lot, but perhaps it's the implicit problem of repetition.
Okay, I think we have done enough for today. Thank you.